بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته brothers and sisters and our friends. How are you? May God guide you, bless you and shower you with His mercy and love. Welcome to the Global Dawah Movement Show, the GDM Show. Today we're going to be talking about the limitations of science. And with me we have Brother Subur Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum, bro. How's it going? Everything good? Alhamdulillah. Why must we talk about the limitations of science?
I think it's because of the time that we live in. So say during the time of our great ancestors, science was maybe seen as alchemy, is seen as all those crazy scientists in their white suits doing all the sort of weird experiments. But I think now it's taken on a philosophy or religion of its own. And I think it's because of all the scientific advancements around the world, iPhones, satellites, all this sort of nanotechnology that we have. And it's led to this perception that, look, when we were religious in Europe, we didn't really get far. We were just, hunting witches and stuff. But when we got into science, we made advancements, we went to space, and now we can, see Lady Gaga on YouTube, right? It's amazing. We live in this amazing world.
Who's that, by the way? I'm only kidding.
So, this whole scientific enterprise has, I believe, it's created a side product, which is science has given us so much physical products and has given us so much benefits in terms of healthcare. And
it works.
It works. Maybe this is what we should be using for existential questions and spiritual questions and moral questions.
So I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because science has been so productive, it works. Therefore, it should work for everything else. For example, it could answer why we exist, what we're here for, whose are we, why are we, for whom are we.
Programming your wife. Oh, sorry.
So,
Freudian slip.
So all of these questions, people think now that science is going to answer them, right? Because science works on everything else.
Yeah.
And actually, that mindset is quite unscientific, isn't it?
Well,
because science is limited, isn't it?
I mean, it's interesting. A lot of science popularizers would have you think it's not. I mean, if you remember, you had a conversation with Richard Dawkins. He said something during the World Atheist Convention about somebody said, should we study the philosophy of science? And his reply was,
just do the science.
Just do the science.
Yes.
And did you not feel that it's almost like they want to cover up the
foundations
of
what
science?
was interesting was that if you do study the philosophy of science, you see that not all scientific truths are true. They're work in progress. They're in a flux. They're revisable. There is no science Moses tablets. And this is what I want to discuss right now. So let's talk about three main limitations.
Sure.
So the first one we want to talk about is basically what? You tell me.
Well, it's just that science doesn't give you any sort of objective morality. It's amoral.
Okay, so the first point is amoral. So what do we mean by amoral? Does it mean me being a scientist, not that I am, but say I was a scientist, does it mean I'm immoral?
Well, not quite. You could be. But what it actually means is that science doesn't give you a foundation for morality.
Objective
morality, right? So, you can't put right and wrong in a test tube and look at it. You can't, should so and so be ethically right or wrong. You can't actually scientifically put that on do some sort of acid test on that. You just can't. It's
sure.
just science just has nothing to say about morality.
But science can tell you about pain and pleasure, so it can inform our morality. But obviously, it can't provide a basis, because if it was about pain and pleasure, then no one would be born, because women go through so much pain to give birth.
That's a good point.
So it doesn't give you a foundation for morality, for objective morals. And what we mean by objective is that it's not just based on our limited minds and individual feelings. Morals are outside in a way, so they require grounding. So you're saying science can't provide a basis for objective morals?
That's not the objective of science. So when people try and use it for that, with the moral landscape and all the rest, all these sort of books, it just doesn't make sense.
Yes.
You're using a hammer for something that you need a screwdriver for.
Exactly,
Right?
because what does science actually say? Science actually says that we're just basically a product of a lengthy biological process. So we've been reared according to certain social biological conditions, and there's no moral meaning in that. Because if we were reared, as Charles Darwin said in the 19th century, if we were reared like the beehives, we would think it's morally okay to kill our fertile daughters. What about the nurse shark, bro? What does the nurse shark do?
Yeah, it does something very interesting to his partner, which
it basically
get arrested.
According to National Geographic, it forces itself on its mate,
yeah,
which is like rape. So if we were reared under precisely the same biological conditions as the nurse shark, then we would think rape is morally okay.
Or when a lion goes and kills a zebra, you don't say murder, you just say dinner, right?
That's so true. So therefore, science is amoral from that perspective. The next limitation of science is what?
Well, it doesn't give you all truths. And
It doesn't give you all truths.
all
Okay.
truth. Right? I think this is important.
What do you
to
mean by that?
Unpack that a little bit. So science itself is based on mathematics and logical truths. Now you can't arrive at mathematics or logical truths via science. They exist before you have the scientific method.
So you need maths, reason, and logic before you have science.
Exactly.
So to claim that science proves these things
It's
it's like
circular.
arguing in a circle.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And other than that, we obviously have the say-so of others. So we have one scientist who's studying biology, and he might look at the RNA of one particular thing in the whole of science, right? In the whole of biology, it's one particular thing. And that's just one page in his research. All the rest of biology, he has to accept purely on the say-so of others.
But
Right?
what if he says, I only accept the say-so of others because I know if I were to retest it and do the experiment myself, it would agree with what they've come up with.
Yeah, he's right. But at that very moment that he said that, he hasn't done the tests.
Exactly.
So he has to accept it on testimony at that
And
point.
yeah, and the very fact that he's saying that if I were to retest it, it may come up with the same results, that belief itself is based on a say-so of others still. Because you
Exactly.
haven't done it. You just believe it because someone's told you that if you were to do it, you can come up with the same results, for example.
Yeah.
What if this is something a little bit more profound and said, well, I agree with these results because they overall do not contradict our previous experiences?
Well, our previous experiences are based on the testimony say-so of others.
Exactly.
So this is like a really bad smell for some people. It just doesn't go away. That you have to have testimony. You have to have these other truths.
You know what this reminds me of? David Hume. Because David Hume said we accept testimony, the famous kind of empiricist skeptic, Scottish skeptic. He said we need testimony to live and to understand many things, but we only accept it because it agrees with our collective experiences.
Which is again testimony.
Exactly. Professor Cody recently in 1991 in his book Testimony of Philosophical Study or Discussion, he said, hold on a second, David Hume. He didn't say it in those words, but I'm just putting a bit of spice on it. Hold on a second, David Hume. What do you mean by collective experiences? Because you don't know everyone's collective experience via doing the experience or the experiment yourself. You have to rely on the say-so of others, what people's collective experiences are. So it shows that testimony is fundamental still. Okay, so we've shown that we need reason, logic, testimony, which is outside of science, in order for science to be productive. So it needs other sources of knowledge too. Science is not the only source of knowledge, so it's limited from that perspective. The final one is what we observe. Why
It's
is
just
that a limitation?
I mean, it's the sensory perception essentially, right? So we're actually blocked by our own senses. There's certain frequencies we can't hear. There's certain things in the light spectrum we just can't see, and other creatures can. And every, say, couple of decades, there's a new instrument, and we start discovering things that never existed before, right? So we are always limited by the technology that we have and by our own senses
And our own observations.
right? So if as a scientist I basically said 200 years ago, there is no such thing which is smaller than an atom. There's no electrons, there's no whatever. There's no way you could scientifically 200 years ago prove that or disprove that.
That's true.
Because science just hits a roadblock.
So this reminds me of what the academic Elliot Sober said in his essay called Empiricism. He's a philosopher of science, when he said that scientists are limited to the observations they have at hand. So really, that's the beauty of science, isn't it? Because what they're saying is, you may have a future observation that denies previous conclusions. And the history of science is full of these things.
Well, it's a revolution. You get fluxes all the time. Universe is eternal. No, it's not. It's expanding. Sun is stationary. No, actually, it's going in orbit.
So let me ask you this. Are we ever going to have the total number of observations for a particular phenomenon?
That's actually impossible.
Exactly,
I mean,
because we may
that's- yeah.
always be able to have a new observation that we haven't observed or we haven't seen based on new instruments or maybe more careful observations, and that observation itself in the future can contradict previous conclusions. So it shows there is a limitation. You're limited to the current observations you have at hand.
And academics who, they're the people obviously you don't always see at the forefront. You see the science popularizers. They would agree with this. They would say, look, science is
I want to put a
probabilistic.
challenge. Let's end on this. Here's the challenge. Go to any sincere philosopher of science, right? Secular, even atheist, and ask them, is science written in stone? Do we have a Moses tablets? Ask them, is it possible that there will be a future observation that can contradict current conclusions? And I'm telling you, they'll say yes. If you find me one that says no, then you get a gift. Anyway, so we discussed the limitation of science today. We spoke about 3 limitations. Number 1, science is immoral. Number 2, there are other sources of knowledge and science, other ways to truth. Science requires reason, logic, mathematics, and testimony in order for science to be science. And finally, science is limited to the observations they have at hand, which means you may have a future observation that can currently contradict current conclusions. By the way, we summarize all of this. We're going to have other shows going into greater depth on these issues. So don't think we just skim the surface. Well, we have, but don't think we're just going to skim the surface. We're going to scratch the surface and go even deeper in future shows with myself, Sabur, Imran, and others. May Allah bless you. See you very soon. Like, share. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.